Have you ever wondered why the person who acted like they did not care suddenly starts thinking about you only after you are gone? Why they stayed silent when you needed answers, but something changed the moment you stopped chasing them? It feels unfair. It feels confusing. For a long time, you may have believed that your love was invisible, that your patience meant nothing, that your kindness was taken for granted. But there is something about human psychology that many people never understand. Some people do not recognize the value of what they have while it is still within reach. They only begin to see it when the silence they created becomes permanent. And if you stay until the end, you will discover why moving on is often the moment everything changes, not only inside you, but inside the person who thought you would never leave. There is a painful truth that many people spend years trying to avoid. Love cannot force awareness. You cannot make someone appreciate your effort by giving even more of yourself. You cannot convince another person to value your heart if they have never learned how to face their own emotions. This is one of the hardest lessons in life because most people believe that if they love harder, explain better, wait longer, or forgive one more time, things will finally change. But that belief slowly becomes a prison. Every extra chance feels like hope. Every excuse feels reasonable. Every disappointment becomes easier to accept because you keep telling yourself tomorrow will be different. Yet tomorrow arrives and the same distance remains. People with avoidant patterns often struggle with emotional closeness. It is not always because they are cruel. It is not always because they never cared. More often, closeness awakens fears they have never learned to handle. Real intimacy asks them to become vulnerable. It asks them to face emotions they have spent years hiding. Instead of moving toward connection, they move away from it. They create space. They become quiet. They convince themselves that distance will protect them from discomfort. What they do not realize is that every step away from the relationship is also a step away from someone who genuinely wanted to understand them. At first, you probably did not notice it. You thought they were simply busy. Maybe they needed time. Maybe stress was affecting them. So you became more patient. You gave them room. You tried not to ask for too much. You lowered your expectations because you believed love required sacrifice. Little by little, you adjusted your own needs just to keep the connection alive. You accepted less communication, less affection, less honesty, less certainty. Without realizing it, you began shrinking yourself so the relationship could survive. This is where so many people lose themselves. Not because they stopped loving, but because they stopped listening to their own heart. They became experts at understanding someone else's fears while completely ignoring their own pain. They kept asking one question, Pierre, what if I just try a little harder? But the better question was always different. Why am I the only one trying? Human psychology teaches us something powerful. The mind adapts to whatever happens repeatedly. If someone constantly receives your attention, no matter how they behave, they slowly begin to expect it. Not because they plan to take you for granted, but because the human brain quickly turns consistency into normality. Your endless forgiveness becomes ordinary. Your loyalty becomes expected. Your presence becomes something they assume will always be there. And when something is always available, people rarely stop to measure its value. Think about how often people overlook the air they breathe. They never think about it until they cannot breathe. The same pattern appears in relationships. Constant availability often hides true value. Scarcity reveals it. This is why your silence eventually becomes louder than all the words you ever spoke. It interrupts the pattern they believed would never change. But reaching that point is never easy. Before someone truly moves on, they usually fight one final battle inside themselves. They question everything. They wonder if leaving means giving up. They fear that walking away will erase every beautiful memory they shared. They worry that choosing themselves makes them selfish. These thoughts create emotional chains that keep people stuck far longer than they deserve. The truth is, moving on is not an act of revenge. It is not about making another person regret losing you. It is not about proving your worth to someone who failed to see it. Real healing begins when your focus changes direction. Instead of asking why they could not love you the way you needed, you begin asking why you accepted less than you deserved. That single shift changes everything. It takes your energy away from chasing answers and puts it into rebuilding yourself. Something remarkable happens when you stop chasing. Your mind becomes quieter. The emotional chaos slowly loses its power. You begin seeing things that were hidden by hope. You remember the promises that were never fulfilled, the conversations that always ended without resolution, the moments when you ignored your intuition because your heart wanted a different ending. Clarity arrives not because time magically heals everything, but because distance removes the emotional fog that kept you trapped. This is why growth feels uncomfortable at first. Your identity begins changing. You are no longer the person waiting for a message that may never come. You are no longer measuring your value by another person's attention. Every day you spend investing in yourself instead of chasing someone else's approval strengthens something inside you that cannot be taken away. Confidence is built this way, not through perfect circumstances, but through repeated choices that honor your own worth. Ironically, this is also the stage where many avoidant people begin noticing the absence they once ignored. The familiar pattern disappears. The messages stop. The emotional safety net they assumed would always remain is suddenly gone. Their routine changes. Their expectations are challenged. For the first time, they are forced to sit with something they successfully avoided before: silence. But this silence feels different because now it belongs to them. The greatest mistake many people make is believing that their absence has no impact. They assume they were never important because they were never fully appreciated. Yet value is often recognized through loss, not possession. Some lessons only become clear when there is no opportunity left to undo the damage. That is why your decision to move forward carries more power than endless explanations ever could. It becomes a message without words, a message that says your life will no longer wait for someone who refuses to meet you halfway. And this is where the story truly begins to change. Because the moment you stop making someone else the center of your world, you become the center of your own. That quiet transformation creates consequences that neither of you expected. While you are rebuilding your confidence piece by piece, the person who once avoided everything emotional may finally be forced to face the one thing they spent the longest running from: the reality of what they lost. The hardest part to understand is that realization rarely arrives in the middle of comfort. It almost always appears after certainty disappears. As long as someone believes you will remain available, there is little pressure to question their own choices. Life continues as usual. Days pass, habits stay the same. They distract themselves with work, entertainment, new conversations, or endless routines. Everything seems normal on the surface, but the human mind has a strange way of responding when something familiar quietly vanishes. The absence that once seemed unimportant slowly becomes impossible to ignore. At first, they may convince themselves that nothing has changed. They tell themselves you simply need time. They expect another message to appear. They assume another chance will eventually come because it always did before. This expectation is built from repetition. When every disagreement ended with your forgiveness, they unconsciously accepted that pattern as permanent. They never imagined a day when your silence would actually mean you had chosen peace over uncertainty. Then something unexpected begins to happen. Small reminders appear without warning: a place you both knew, a familiar song, a memory connected to an ordinary moment. The brain naturally connects emotions with experiences, and those connections do not disappear just because someone tried to avoid them. They return at unexpected times. What was pushed aside starts demanding attention. The emotions that were postponed begin asking difficult questions. This is often the first time they stop looking outward and begin looking inward. Instead of asking why you left, another question quietly appears. What if this happened because of the way I handled things? That question is uncomfortable because it requires honesty. It removes the protection that blame once provided. Facing personal responsibility is never easy, especially for someone who spent years escaping emotional discomfort. For a long time, they may have believed that distance solved problems. Whenever emotions became intense, stepping away felt safer than staying present. Silence felt easier than difficult conversations. Avoidance seemed like control. Yet every decision has consequences, even when those consequences are delayed. Feelings that are ignored do not disappear. They simply wait until there is no longer anywhere to hide. Meanwhile, something completely different is happening inside you. The person who once counted every hour, every message, and every disappointment is no longer living in that emotional cycle. Healing does not happen in one dramatic moment. It happens through quiet decisions repeated every day. You wake up and choose yourself. You protect your energy. You stop creating imaginary futures with someone who never matched your commitment. These choices may seem small, but together they rebuild a life that no longer depends on another person's approval. This transformation changes the way you see yourself. You begin recognizing that your kindness was never the problem. Your loyalty was not a weakness. Your willingness to love deeply was not something to regret. The real mistake was believing that your value depended on whether another person acknowledged it. Once that belief begins to disappear, a new level of freedom enters your life. Confidence grows differently than most people expect. It is not loud. It does not demand attention. It is calm. It is the quiet certainty that says, I no longer need to chase what refuses to choose me. That kind of strength cannot be borrowed from anyone else. It is earned by surviving disappointment without allowing it to define your future. As your inner world becomes stronger, their emotional world often becomes more unsettled. The connection they once thought would always be waiting has become uncertain. Human psychology explains that people often notice emotional security only after it is gone. What felt ordinary suddenly feels rare. What seemed guaranteed suddenly becomes unreachable. The contrast creates awareness that never existed before. Many people assume regret appears instantly, but that is rarely how the mind works. Regret grows slowly. It develops as reality replaces assumption. Every day without hearing from you challenges the story they once believed. They expected another opportunity, another conversation, another chance to return whenever they felt ready. Instead, they are confronted by something they never prepared for. Life has continued without them. That realization can become deeply unsettling because it forces comparison. They begin remembering the consistency you offered. They recall moments when you showed patience instead of judgment. They think about conversations where you reached for understanding while they withdrew into silence. These memories feel different now because they are viewed through the lens of loss instead of convenience. This does not mean every avoidant person immediately changes. Awareness and transformation are not the same thing. Recognizing a mistake is only the first step. Growth requires courage. It requires accepting responsibility without making excuses. It requires facing uncomfortable truths instead of escaping them again. Some people choose that path, others continue repeating old patterns with different people, believing the outcome will somehow change. This is why your healing should never depend on whether they return. Waiting for someone else's awakening keeps your future connected to their decisions. Real freedom begins when your happiness is no longer tied to another person's emotional progress. Their journey belongs to them. Yours belongs to you. The greatest victory is not making someone miss you. The greatest victory is reaching a place where your peace cannot be taken away by another person's confusion. Imagine waking up without replaying old conversations in your mind. Imagine no longer searching for hidden meanings behind every memory. Imagine carrying hope for your own future instead of waiting for someone else's change. That is the kind of life worth building. There comes a moment when you finally understand something that once seemed impossible. Closure is not always given. Sometimes it is created. It is built through acceptance, self-respect, and the decision to stop asking questions that have already stolen enough of your time. You stop expecting an explanation capable of repairing every wound. Instead, you become the explanation. Your growth tells the story that words never could. The surprising truth is that people often become most attractive when they stop seeking validation. There is a quiet confidence in someone who has learned to protect their heart without becoming bitter. They no longer beg for attention. They no longer negotiate their worth. They simply walk forward with a deeper understanding of who they are. That energy changes every future relationship because it is built on respect rather than fear. And while you continue becoming someone stronger, wiser, and emotionally grounded, another reality unfolds beyond your awareness. The person who once believed they had endless time is beginning to understand that opportunities are not permanent. Some doors remain open only for a season. Once they close, no amount of wishing can return things to the way they were. That realization marks the beginning of a battle they can no longer avoid. Because the greatest conflict is no longer between the two of you. It is between the person they used to be and the person they now realize they should have become. That inner battle does not end quickly. In many cases, it becomes louder with time. There is no distraction strong enough to silence a truth that has finally reached the surface. A person can stay busy. They can fill every hour with work, travel, conversations, or new experiences. Yet there are quiet moments that cannot be escaped. Late at night, early in the morning, during ordinary days when the mind has nothing to chase except its own thoughts. This is where reality becomes impossible to ignore. The hardest lesson arrives when they understand that the future they imagined no longer exists. They may have believed they could return whenever they felt emotionally ready. They assumed your heart would remain exactly where they left it. But life does not wait forever. Time changes people. Pain changes people. Healing changes people. The version of you that once accepted uncertainty has slowly disappeared, replaced by someone who now values peace more than empty promises. This is why personal growth is so powerful. It does not simply repair broken confidence. It creates a completely different standard for your life. You begin recognizing the difference between attention and genuine care. You stop confusing mixed signals with affection. You no longer mistake inconsistency for mystery. Instead, you choose relationships where actions and words move in the same direction. Many people never realize how much emotional energy they lose by holding on to someone who is unwilling to meet them with the same commitment. Every day spent waiting quietly steals focus from dreams, friendships, opportunities, and personal goals. It narrows your world until one person becomes the center of everything. But once that emotional weight is removed, something extraordinary happens. Your vision expands again. You begin noticing possibilities that were hidden behind constant disappointment. There is another psychological truth that deserves attention. The human mind remembers unfinished experiences more intensely than completed ones. This is why unresolved relationships often stay in someone's thoughts long after they have ended. The conversations that never happened, the apologies that were never spoken, the future that was imagined but never lived. These unfinished chapters remain active because the brain naturally searches for resolution. For the avoidant person, this unfinished chapter may become impossible to ignore. They replay moments that once seemed insignificant. They remember opportunities to speak honestly but remained silent. They think about times when vulnerability felt frightening, so they chose emotional distance instead. Looking back, they begin seeing that protecting themselves also pushed away someone who genuinely cared. That awareness can become one of the heaviest emotional burdens a person carries. Yet your purpose is not to celebrate their regret. Their struggle is not your destination. Your greatest achievement is becoming someone whose happiness is no longer controlled by another person's realization. That is real emotional freedom. It means your future no longer depends on receiving an apology. It means your confidence does not rise or fall based on whether someone finally understands your value. There is incredible strength in reaching the point where forgiveness becomes a gift you give yourself. Forgiveness does not mean pretending the pain never happened. It does not erase disappointment or rewrite history. It simply means refusing to carry emotional weight that no longer belongs in your life. Holding on to resentment keeps old wounds alive. Releasing it creates space for something far greater than revenge. It creates room for peace. As your heart becomes lighter, your decisions become clearer. You stop accepting half-hearted effort because loneliness no longer frightens you. You understand that being alone for a season is healthier than remaining in a connection where your needs are constantly ignored. This realization transforms every future choice. Instead of asking, "Will they stay?" you begin asking, "Does this relationship bring honesty, respect, and emotional safety into my life?" That single question protects your future better than endless hope ever could. People often search for confidence in success, appearance, or recognition from others. But lasting confidence is born somewhere much deeper. It comes from keeping promises to yourself. It grows every time you refuse to abandon your standards just to keep someone from leaving. It becomes stronger each time you choose dignity over desperation. Those decisions quietly reshape your identity until self-respect becomes your natural way of living. The beautiful part of this journey is that you eventually stop looking behind you, not because the memories disappear, but because they no longer control your direction. You appreciate what the experience taught you without allowing it to define who you become. Pain turns into wisdom. Disappointment becomes discernment. The chapter that once felt like the end slowly reveals itself as the beginning of a stronger life. Ironically, this is often the point where people from the past try to reconnect. They notice your absence in ways they never expected. They sense that your energy has changed. They realize you are no longer waiting in the same place emotionally. Sometimes they return with words they should have spoken much earlier. Sometimes they come back carrying regret, hoping time can be reversed. But life follows only one direction: forward. Whether they return or remain a memory is no longer the question that matters. The real question is whether you have become the kind of person who refuses to settle for less than mutual effort. That answer determines the quality of every relationship that follows. Your standards become your protection. Your wisdom becomes your guide. Your peace becomes something that cannot be traded for temporary attention. Never underestimate what happens when someone finally discovers their own worth. They walk differently. They think differently. They make decisions from confidence instead of fear. They stop begging for love because they understand that genuine connection is never built through chasing. It is built through two people choosing each other with honesty, consistency, and emotional maturity. If this experience has taught you anything, let it be this: your value never disappeared because another person failed to recognize it. A diamond does not become ordinary because someone walks past it without looking. Its worth remains the same. The same is true for your heart, your loyalty, your kindness, and your ability to love deeply. Those qualities were never your weakness. They were always your strength. The only mistake was placing them where they could not be fully appreciated. So keep moving forward. Continue building a life that reflects your true worth. Let every challenge become proof of your resilience. Let every difficult season strengthen your character instead of hardening your heart. The greatest transformation was never about making someone realize they hurt you. It was about discovering that your future was never meant to depend on their awareness. The moment you truly embraced that truth was the moment you stopped losing yourself and started becoming the person you were always capable of being. And that is a victory no one can ever take away. There is one final truth that changes everything. It is not about who was right. It is not about who suffered more. It is about what you become after the experience is over. Every difficult relationship leaves behind two possible paths. One path leads to bitterness, the other leads to wisdom. The direction you choose will shape every connection that enters your life from this point forward. Many people spend years hoping that one conversation will erase every painful memory. They imagine that if the other person finally admits their mistakes, every wound will disappear. But healing does not depend on hearing the perfect words. Even the most sincere apology cannot return lost time. It cannot rebuild the days spent questioning your worth. It cannot replace the peace you sacrificed while waiting for someone to become emotionally available. The past remains the past. What truly matters is what you decide to do with the lessons it gave you. Think about how much stronger you have become without even noticing. There was a time when every unanswered message affected your mood. Every moment of emotional distance filled your mind with questions. Every small sign of attention gave you hope again. Now compare that version of yourself with the person you are becoming. You no longer allow uncertainty to control your emotions. You understand that consistency creates trust, while confusion slowly destroys it. This awareness is not something you were born with. It was earned through experience. Life has a quiet way of preparing people for greater things. Sometimes preparation does not look like success. Sometimes it looks like disappointment. It looks like closed doors, unexpected endings, and moments that make no sense while they are happening. Only later do you realize those experiences were building the strength you needed for the future. They were teaching you to recognize your own value before asking someone else to recognize it. This is where emotional maturity begins. It begins when you stop asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" and start asking, "Why did I believe I had to prove my worth in the first place?" Those are two completely different questions. The first keeps your attention on someone else's choices. The second brings your attention back to yourself, where real growth always starts. One of the greatest gifts you can give yourself is permission to stop carrying responsibility for another person's emotional limitations. You were never responsible for fixing fears that existed before you arrived. You were never responsible for teaching someone the importance of honesty if they refused to learn it. You were never responsible for convincing another human being that your love had value. Your responsibility has always been much simpler. Protect your peace, honor your standards. Stay true to the person you want to become. There will always be people who are unable to meet you where you stand. That does not mean you should lower yourself to make the distance easier for them. Healthy relationships are built when two people willingly move toward each other. They are not built by one person doing all the emotional work while the other remains comfortable with silence. Mutual effort is not a luxury. It is the foundation that keeps trust alive. As you continue moving forward, you will notice another change inside yourself. You become less interested in chasing excitement and more interested in choosing stability. You stop being impressed by beautiful words that never become meaningful actions. You begin paying attention to character instead of temporary emotion. You discover that peace is far more valuable than unpredictability. That change protects your heart in ways you never thought possible. There is also something deeply powerful about letting go without losing your ability to love. Pain often tempts people to build walls around their hearts. It tells them that caring less will prevent future disappointment. But true strength is different. True strength allows you to remain kind without becoming naive. It allows you to remain open without abandoning wisdom. It teaches you that protecting yourself does not require becoming cold. It simply requires making better choices. One day you may hear that the person who once walked away finally understands what they lost. Maybe they changed. Maybe they started facing emotions they once avoided. Maybe they now see your value with complete clarity. If that day comes, remember something important. Their realization is part of their journey, not yours. You do not need to reopen old chapters simply because someone else is ready to read them differently. The greatest achievement is reaching a place where your happiness no longer depends on what happens behind you. Your attention is focused on the life you are creating, not the life that could have been. You become excited about new opportunities instead of old disappointments. You invest your energy in people who appreciate honesty, respect, and emotional responsibility. That decision changes everything because your future begins reflecting the standards you finally chose to protect. Never forget that every ending creates space for a beginning that could not exist before. If one chapter had never closed, you might never have discovered your own resilience. You might never have learned the importance of healthy boundaries. You might never have realized that self-respect attracts healthier relationships than self-sacrifice ever could. Sometimes what feels like loss is actually the removal of what was preventing your growth. Your story was never meant to end with rejection. It was meant to continue with transformation. Every challenge refined your character. Every setback strengthened your judgment. Every difficult moment prepared you to recognize the kind of love that brings security instead of confusion. That is not failure. That is progress. So keep choosing yourself, not out of pride, but out of wisdom. Keep building habits that strengthen your confidence. Keep surrounding yourself with people who bring peace instead of emotional exhaustion. Keep believing that your future can be brighter than your past, because it absolutely can. The person who once overlooked your worth does not define your destiny. Your decisions do. In the end, the most powerful moment is not when someone else finally understands your value. The most powerful moment is when you no longer need them to. That is the day your freedom becomes complete. That is the day your confidence comes from within instead of from outside approval. That is the day you stop searching for validation in places where it never truly existed. And from that moment forward, every step you take is no longer driven by fear of being left behind. It is driven by the quiet certainty that you have already found the one person who will always be worth investing in, yourself.